I live in Southwest Florida, and I enjoy both the experience of and the study of physical mediumship, and thought it would be a good idea since Grant Cameron is on an orb thing these days, and Shannon Taggart has an extensive background in physical mediumship and the photography of, the study of, and as well as the study of orbs. So I thought we'd have a nice conversation between the three of us today on subjects of common occurrence.
Well, thank you, Walter, and thank you for setting this up. Shannon actually has a lot of other things. She does the apports. I'm writing the book on the apports. She basically hits all the bases. I just produced a book called Contact Modalities, as you know, and I go through these 70 different modalities that people can use to get into the field. And basically, Shannon's book, Seance, when I looked at it, basically goes through the same sort of procedure of looking at this, looking at that, trying to find answers. So I really appreciate the fact that you brought Shannon Taggart on today to talk about her book and about orbs, which I just got dragged into. That's the way my field works. I don't really plan to do anything. I just get dragged down one rabbit hole and then down another. But for people that, you know, a lot of people, Walter, will sort of turn this off right away because they want the nuts and bolts. They want, you know, let's grab the little aliens and kill them and grab their ship and get their engine out of the ship and we're all going to be rich or whatever. And when you start talking about physical mediumship, people sort of turn off. But let me tie this into UFOs right off the hop here. If you, I think you've seen did you see the interview with Leslie Kane with Jeffrey Mishlove? She does the interview. And so Leslie Kane is the prominent UFO reporter now, wrote for the New York Times, did all these stories about the U.S. government has got UFOs and stuff. And so you look at it as very nuts and bolts and we got these crafts and stuff. But when you look at the interview she did with Jeffrey Mishlove, she talks about the hand. She talks about this experience where here's this woman who you think is nuts and bolts, and she's in this physical mediumship seance, and this thing sort of appears, the ectoplasm comes, and this hand comes, and she actually touches the hand, and she says it's a real hand, and she's touching this hand, and then the hand bangs on the table a couple of times and just disappears. And I would say that when the UFO thing it gets resolved, that's what you're going to see. They can pop into our 3D world and they can pop back out, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're flesh and blood. So I'm very interested in and you dragged me into that. Well, I was sort of into the physical mediumship stuff. I was very interested because I realized that this was critically important to understanding what was going on in those seances. So I'm really glad that you brought Shannon here. So welcome Shannon Taggart to my little talk here, and I really appreciate the work you've done. I've seen your book, Seance, and you are the person I've been looking for a long time, and I'll tell you the first reason why. I don't know if you've seen my orb panels. I do 3 orb panels, and I suddenly got this situation where people have these collections, and these aren't collections of 50, they're collections of thousands of, and they've never made them public. I sort of got into these people and they started coming to me, and I am now aware of 500,000 photographs of orbs, of what I call Zendra mist, and of beam photographs. And these things are all linked. And when I was doing it, I started putting these things out, and to me, it was just like, wow, this is so cool. Take a look at these photographs. Look at this person. This one woman has 9,000 photos in one album on her Facebook. Never really made it public, and I'm putting it up. And of course, I get attacked. And I'm sure you've been attacked about your photographs. So well, the first thing I want to ask you is how many photographs have you taken? You're a professional photographer. Can you go through your background? Because a lot of people are going to say, well, you know, they said to me, well, why don't you get a professional? Why don't you get a photographer? Why don't you get somebody who knows something about UFOs or about photographs? Because I really didn't. To me, it was just like, wow, take a look at these photographs. So give us your background in terms of a photographer, and how many photographs do you think you've taken in your lifetime?
Hundreds of thousands. I've been a professional photographer for, oh gosh, no, probably about 20 years. But before that, I went to school for photography at the Rochester Institute of Technology. So I have a fully technical background. I understand what's happening technically. completely, but yet I still, so I might be looking at it a little bit differently than some of the people who are taking the pictures. And certainly I might be coming from a different place, but it is from an open-minded place. I do think there is something very interesting going on with consciousness and synchronicity and these photographs. So I try to not focus on, you know, I mean, the orb photographs, for example, they're more common now that we have digital cameras with the smaller chip and with a flash that's closer to the lens. That would be like a technical thing that would make you more likely to get orbs in your pictures. But there, at the same time, there are also people who claim to have gotten orbs in clean rooms under conditions, so it couldn't have been dust or what have you. I'm not so interested in picking apart the technical part per se, because unless you were there and actually witnessed a photograph being taken, it's hard to even know what was going on. I mean, that's part of the mystery of photography. But what I did notice is that when I watch practitioners work, they use their consciousness to call in orbs or make things happen, or it's a play of consciousness, and they do get results. I've seen this hundreds of times where they call it orb calling. I don't know, people have different terms for things. Or, you know, they'll go to a grieving mother, might go to a spot that's special to her child and ask for the child to appear, show orbs, and then they have no orbs, and then they get orbs. So you know, there are technical reasons you might get an orb, you know, dust, water, bugs, those, you can get the orbs from that too, or things that look similar. So I try to, I'm very interested in the practitioners who play with it. And I have done this sort of play myself and have gotten really interesting results.
So give me your story on how you got your first orb and how you suddenly got dragged into this thing.
Well, I got dragged into the whole topic of, so my work is mostly done on the religion of spiritualism. And so people who consider themselves spiritualist mediums. And that I got drawn into that because my family received a message from my grandfather through a medium that proved to be true and told us details about his death that were a big family secret and nobody had known. And so I became a professional photographer. I was working as a photojournalist and for newspapers, and then I was doing PR photography. And then I thought, oh, I'll go to Lilydale, which is the world's largest spiritualist community, which I grew up nearby. I said, oh, I'll go there for a summer and make a quirky photo story about this town of all these interesting characters. And so that's how I got dragged in initially. And here I am, you know, now this is 19 years later. And I just published my book on the topic last year. So I worked 18 years on it. And one thing that's very interesting to all of this is that the beginning of photography has a lot of ties to early spiritualism and also the very birth of modern art. And so I was not expecting to discover that. So art and creativity and photography is connected to these mediumistic practices from the get-go. So that's, but with the orb thing, so I began in 2001, and orbs were not, I mean, it wasn't as common until people got the digital cameras and were working, you know, it was more like but I do know of orbs, people that did have orb experiences before. It just wasn't as widespread. And so as I was working, I became more and more aware of the orb community. And that's because orb photographers got online, met each other, started talking. That's when the practice kind of grew. And but as far as like photography and spiritualism, that has been intertwined since the very beginning. But you know, the internet and the digital cameras kind of gave this whole orb thing, which I would consider like the spirit photography of today. It's a visionary photographic practice. That's the internet and the digital cameras gave rise to it as a practice.
Now your practice is to photograph, I think you had one of the things was to try to photograph ectoplasm. Can you
Yeah.
describe what your actual mission was in terms of going to Lilydale, and maybe explain for people what Lilydale's like? Because I hear a lot about this. I've never been there, but it was critical to your development, that special
Yeah.
place that most people don't know about.
Yeah, Lilydale is a tiny town located on a lake in upstate New York. Um, it's been there since the 1870s, and it's been the spiritualist community. It is supposedly on land that was sacred to Native American Indians. It's hard to really know exactly what took place there, but it's likely that there were burial mounds nearby. Um, in the beginning, it was spiritualists. It was kind of like a vacation spot for spiritualists. And what a lot of people don't know is that early spiritualists, it was a lot of the intellectuals of the day. There were a lot of very famous, influential people interested in spiritualism. It was really important to the women's rights movement. So Lilydale was a place where Susan B. Anthony would go to speak on stage. You know, there was a lot of reform people who were radicals and reformers were drawn to spiritualism, and they would hang out at Lilydale. So Lilydale still exists as this tiny little town, and in the summer, it operates as sort of like a psychic summer camp, or you know, you could take mediumship classes. I mean, year round they have church service and everything, but in the summer, it kind of you could take classes in anything there, you know, psychic related. So and it's this amazing little place where it's very unique because there's not a lot of spiritualist communities left, and especially not in the United States. So um, you know, that's where I began, and that's
Okay, and you start this pursuit for ectoplasm. Why
oh
the
yeah,
ectoplasm
ectoplasm.
thing?
Oh yes.
Why did you go down that route?
Well, so I started to learn about the spiritualist photography,
Okay.
and I did not learn this at college. And I studied the history of photography extensively. This was written out of all the history books. And so this is in 2001. Slowly people have become more aware, and now it's actually quite popular in the art world to know about spirit photographs. But at that time, I didn't know that they existed. The spiritualists told me they existed. And I saw these ectoplasmic pictures, which to me just totally blew my mind, because so these are images, if you've seen them, of mediums either, you know, sewn into clothing or half naked, like regurgitating these streams of white that look like cheesecloth, or they look very absurd. They're very dramatic. They're highly some of them are highly sexual. These pictures shocked me because they were some of the most provocative images I'd ever seen, and yet they were not in any of the histories of photography. So I started doing my own research, and so then I became obsessed with the idea of ectoplasm. But in Lilydale at the time, there wasn't a thing such as like an ectoplasm seance, which was, you know, this was the popular physical mediumship of the late 1800s, was not there. And that's because of many accounts of fraud or people being caught cheating. And so spiritualism had really distanced itself from these types of seances. But the mediums I met still believed that in the reality of it. Like I would ask about ectoplasm, they say, well, I believe it can happen, but we're not doing those now. And so something interesting happened, and you know, I'm writing my own, well, I mean, this is just from my observation, somebody might correct me, but I believe that the skull experiment, which happened in the mid to late 90s in England, re-inspired an interest in these dark room ectoplasmic physical mediumship seances, and also inspired people to use cameras and video again. And so I started to notice as I worked on the project that slowly I noticed in England with the Noah's Ark Society, and then there was a movement, the Zerden. There was a magazine for a period of time where people were repicking up these Victorian practices, and slowly it started to happen at Lilydale again. So there was kind of this rebirth. And so when I first started, you couldn't find it, was nearly impossible to find an ectoplasm seance. They were still happening, but it became popular as I started working. And so then it became more widespread, I would say, in 2008 with the German medium Kai Mugi. And he was one of the first to bring back this seance in a very fantastical, in-your-face sort of way. And then he was investigated by Stephen Brody, among others. There were scientists studying him. So this Victorian trope re-begins. And so it really is sort of, and I guess even now that there's more interest in the physical phenomena now than there was in 2001 when I began my project. So I started, I was always looking for ectoplasm, and I was lucky enough to be situated right before it started to come back. So I think there is a resurgence. I don't know, Walter, would you agree with that point, or the resurgence?
Yeah, that's fascinating, by the way. I don't think I've ever heard as a comprehensive and detailed history of Lilydale and spiritualism photography, and I would agree with everything. I do have a question to ask. If you look, because you talked about the art of spiritualist or spirit photography going back to when they were still using luminescent flares for illumination and the like. There are a series of pictures, hundreds actually of them, where you will see what look like apparitions sitting next to an 1880s or an 1890s woman, a portrait perhaps, maybe a family portrait. Sometimes they look staged, sometimes they didn't. Was part of the art of doing that, of making those photographs, was that considered artistic to be able to create those fake apparitions in there? Because some of them obviously are, yet some of them do not seem to be as well. So do we have a convergence of both the artificial and the real in that spirit of photography?
So initially, the goal, why photography was used, is because spiritualism, the goal was to merge science and religion. So they're trying to bring together science and religion. And photography was a very new medium, it's like 1839, photography is invented. 1848 is when spiritualism begins. So almost immediately people were trying to use cameras to prove that there were spirits. And you have to remember also, at this time, people were learning about germ theory, radiation, radio waves, the telegraph, like wireless communication. So it was very much being scientifically proven that there were invisible forces at work. And so why can't we use this new medium of photography and try to photograph what is happening with spiritualists? And I like to say that spiritualism and photography kind of expose each other. The interplay of we realize that photography is a representation of reality. It's not reality itself. And then we also realize that in spiritualism, sometimes people do trick, and also even spiritualist photography is the first time the photographic medium is called into question as a truth teller. The William Mumler, the first spirit photographer, there was a legal case, because the believer believed that he was photographing spirits, and the skeptic believed he was doing physical manipulations. So we learned that photography is a trickster medium. We learned that what you see, like seeing and knowing, can be a different thing. And so it's a very complicated dialogue that happened between them. And at the time, photography was not acknowledged as an art. It was a scientific endeavor, really. Or, it was used to capture people, but it wasn't considered really like a high art, like painting, for example.
A question related to that. You said Lilydale doesn't, I think in one interview I heard you said they don't allow the dark seances to go on in there. The question I have, and I think I asked Walter this previously, is I come from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and we have a huge collection. You probably know there was a doctor here for 30 years And all these photographs were taken in the light. I mean, you have this ectoplasm that was taken, and now you hear this thing, well, the medium could die if the light comes on and stuff. And that's always puzzled me why they were able to take photographs in the light in the early 20th century, and now it's sort of completely reversed. Have you got any insight on that?
No, it's a question of mine as well. Well, although, you know, the early photographs, even, you know, the Manitoba pictures, for example, and the ones earlier, a lot of times they would say the spirits would direct when the photo was taken, and then they would know when the photo was taken that it would be over. Meaning, like, that would mark the end once the light got flashed. But now, today, there are certain mediums who say if the light goes on, you could kill them. There's a lot of, you know, Helen Duncan, for example, the famous medium, is considered a spiritualist martyr, basically because she was, the lights were turned on during one of her seances and the police raided, and she died a few weeks later. And a lot of people say it's because the ectoplasm was out and it got sucked back up into her body. I mean, I don't know, because they definitely did need huge amounts of those Manitoba pictures that you're talking about, the Hamilton images. Those were done with full flash. And, you know, I haven't read all the materials, but I do know the archivist who saved that material, Walter Meyer-Zuerpen, and he believes that all those pictures are 100% genuine. So, I mean, I would ask him. That is a confusing point. And even now, there's a huge fight going on because places like Lilydale or the Arthur Findlay College some say, or especially Arthur Findlay College, they said this, which is a spiritualist learning center in England. They said, you can have dark seances if we can have a heat camera or infrared. And some of the mediums said, no, that will harm me still. So they won't allow it. So it does call all of this stuff into question. And every medium seems to have a different response. So it really depends on the medium.
Walter, go ahead.
You know, this isn't a reason, but maybe an explanation. But if you look at Warren Kaler and Kai and Scott Milligan and the ones that are active international physical mediums right now, all of them started their seance training in the dark. And so when you hear the spirit talk about this, especially sometimes in seance when you get a question in, they'll more or less say, well, you know, this is what we grew up with. This is what we know. We know how to do our things and be ourselves in the dark. So we don't have to deal with the problems of ectoplasmic photophobia or whatever problems that they have with the visible light spectrum. So I think it says something to how the physical medium develops themselves, how the spirit wants to develop, and why it was okay in 1880 to do it and why it isn't now, when you would think it would be the reverse. You would think it would be, well, the spirit should now have accelerated its ability to enter our reality and deal with things such as light and other kinds of energetic activity that they don't like. But it seems like they went the other way. It seems like they lost some of this ability, and maybe that has to do with the fall off of physical mediumship itself, the entering of physical mediumship into the world, as you said, back in the early 2000s. And so I don't know. It makes for a real fascinating discussion, though.
The other thing I would like to ask about that, and I think you mentioned this, Shannon, in an interview, if you look at the Hamilton photos, which I've looked at them quite a few times, I think you mentioned this, is like they look like two-dimensional. They look like, oh, come on. Or it's like they're just really bad, almost like somebody stuck a little cardboard cutout in there. And they all seem to be that way. And yet that may be part of the phenomena that they really, whatever the intelligence is, it really doesn't want you to fully believe it. It sort of wants you to think. So you mentioned that. What do you think about this thing where they just look so really, not faked, but it looks really out of place, these photos?
Yeah, I am interested in that fact as well. The phony quality, the grotesque quality, the shocking absurdity. And I've asked mediums what they think of that. And some mediums say, that's a trickster aspect. That's how the phenomena hides itself. Some say it's purposeful because it's supposed to be dramatic to shock you, to shock your system. Kai Mugi, actually, I did a bunch of interviews with him, and he speaks pretty eloquently about, and that would be in chapter 7 of my book. He speaks quite eloquently about why, and he uses the term occult, which is also scandalous in spiritualism, but why occult imagery is so shocking and grotesque and absurd, and that that's just the nature of it, and that it will always be that way. And I mean, I really like the trickster angle as well as like kind of a metaphor or way of looking at this type of stuff. And yeah, and this you know, in reality or in a seance room that's dark that you can barely see is a very different way of seeing than a camera lens with blasted light, you know. So this seeing and knowing gets crossed, you know. It becomes a different thing. It's not the thing itself, it's a representation of it.
Like George Hansen to bring up the trickster, I call it the theory of wow. In all different, with you, whether it's UFOs, like why do they have lights on them? Why don't they stay around? Why do they just disappear? It's like it's just trying to make you think rather than and go wow, rather because if they wanted to explain to you what was going on, they would explain to you. They're just trying to make, it's almost like it's not, somebody said it's not going to be understandable. It's just to try to sort of crack your mind so you
Yeah.
change your attitude, your thinking.
Yeah.
The question I'd like to ask now is the question about like, so which physical mediums have you worked with, and what kind of procedures are you allowed to use in terms of trying to photograph? Because as you know, a lot of times they don't want anything in the room. They want control of the situation of the circle and this kind of stuff, because a lot of people, you know, are trying to expose them and stuff like this.
Right. It really just depends on the medium. And so basically I build relationships with people, and then whatever they say goes in their seance room, because I'm not a debunker. I see my project is really like has multiple layers. So I'm not trying to prove or disprove anything. I'm trying to explore. I'm also trying to I feel like I'm documenting history. So I'm fine taking a journalistic approach, like I'm only allowed to photograph your cabinet and the way the room was set up, or before and after, or I'm allowed to do whatever, or sometimes my photo shoots are directed by the medium entranced medium. The spirit will tell me what to do in those situations. So because I'm doing like multiple things, it really doesn't, I work with people who want to work with me, and it's usually we develop a relationship, and then I never use pictures that people don't want me to use or don't want put out there. So, you know, it's being sensitive to their way of working and building trust. And so with every medium, it's different. I mean, you know, some people will be like, yes, do whatever you want, like go, like take as many pictures, do it all different ways. And sometimes it'll be like, I'll be told before there's going to be one moment for you to take one picture, and you'll be told when that happens. And I'm okay with any of that stuff.
I assume that a lot of them want you to help document. It's a matter of proof for a lot of these people, correct?
Yes, and this is where sometimes my approach is confusing to some people, because I am not looking to prove anything. And I'm not certain, I am in constant question about what photography is and what it can prove. I'm interested in into seeing what happens. So I'm kind of like this experimental approach. And I think that's why, a lot of the early photography was forgotten and disregarded, is because it failed at proof. You know, or it didn't, you know, it wasn't able to accomplish this like pure fact-finding mission that the people using it set out with, so it was disregarded. But I see it as, if anything, it's an incredible original iconography that was created. You know, it's the first time religion was paired with photography rather than painting. So it does, it tells you a lot about spiritualism and what was happening and what was being invoked or what was sought or what was believed in those situations. So I look at it as also as like a religious artistic practice as well as a scientific endeavor. And so if you look at it that way, I find it endlessly fascinating. But for many spiritualists, oh, this one's true and this one's false. And it depends on who you're talking to, which ones are true and which ones are false. You know, a lot of people believe that the Hamilton collection is all bogus, and then you have people who swear that everything in that collection is genuine. So
so you work with Kai. Is there anybody in America that you work with? Is there any physical mediums? Because I mean, we had the interview with Kai, and he sort of said like there's lots. It's like it's, you know, and I seem to think that there's not that many who are really good physical mediums who can do like the manifestations and stuff. So is there anybody in America you're working with, or is it just Kai?
I've worked with many different people. But in America, for example, in Lilydale, there's one of the, he used to be on the board of directors there. He's a prominent figure in Lilydale, Dr. Neil Zepkowski, and he has a house outside of the gates where he'll host physical mediumship, like people who travel in, or he also has a table tipping circle that he conducts there. He also holds a Native American Indian ceremony, like the Sundance. The tribe takes over his land and does Sundance rituals there. I know a lot of people developing in the US, but I mean, it's true. It's more common in England and Europe right now to be a traveling physical medium or somebody, you know, like Kai or Warren, or for a period of time, there was a place in France called Mont Cabaral, which kind of acted as like a physical mediumship center. And that was by two English mediums who were living in France, Tom Morris and Kevin Lawrenson. And I think they held that place open for like 6 or 8 years. But I mean, there are developing circles here, but do I know any? I mean, no, I think it's just more common in England and in Europe.
Are you still doing this now that your book Seance is finished? Are you still pursuing this?
Well, funny enough, I had outlined a sequel before the pandemic, and a lot of that required a lot of traveling. But one of the chapters was to go do a deep dive into orb photography, in what you would term instrumental transcommunication. So that would be like working with mediumship and other things like water, cameras, you know, smoke, trying to do orbs. So what I've been doing is I've been trying to do Zoom sessions with a number of people, and I have already started that. And I have, so since the pandemic, I've done a bunch of that type of work. And the more I found, the more I focused on wanting those types of results, the more interesting the results are becoming. But so that work is as of yet unpublished. Wow. I'm also working on it's just something I started during the pandemic, and like also there's this idea of contagion. You know, if you talk to somebody who does EVP, for example, electronic voice phenomena, they'll say, if you don't get any EVP, just spend some time around somebody. Robin Foy of the Skull Group says, once you spend time around me, you'll catch it like a virus, you know? So this idea of contagion and practice is something I found fascinating, especially now when we're all quarantined under this pandemic because of a contagion. So there's this, I like the meta-ness of it. But so one of my ideas was to be in contact with different practitioners and see if their way of working did show up in my way of working, in my photographs in different ways. So I've been playing with this idea just online. So another thing is there's a lot of very interesting people using photography to document their own mediumship. And just really fascinating stuff. Some use heat cameras, some use reflections in their eyeglasses. A lot of this is being shared on Facebook. So I was interested in seeking out these photographers, these other spirit photographers, and kind of trying to to work with them. And I can't do that in person now, but I have worked with some of them online and hope to do it in person in the future.
The ITC, you have, I think it's Sonia from Brazil and stuff. There's a lot of new stuff. What do you think is the most promising stuff you've seen in terms of new techniques that people are using?
Well, I'm kind of astounded by some of the results. Sonia's work, I don't know I know of her, and I'm not up to date on her latest stuff. I know she is doing stuff with video and certain ways of working where you take material and move it around, and so like that would be like a classic ITC practice. There's several mediums that who just basically photograph themselves while they're entranced that I've just been finding fascinating, because their results are so stunning. And I know they're not, I know they're just photographing, like either with heat or with the regular camera, but the results they're getting there are very strange. You know, for example, like if I was there with my camera, I probably wouldn't get the same pictures they were getting. And so I do think consciousness enters in somehow, and it works with the process. So.
Is this a book project, or is this like a video project you're going to be doing?
I don't know. I mean, I would hope, you know, I had all these ideas for a sequel to Seance, and I was hoping to get to work on it right away, but I think it's going to take some time to evolve, and maybe that's okay. I'm also working on a research project too, so we'll see. I mean, I think everybody's lives got upended because of this, you know, because of the virus. So it's going to take us all into directions I think we weren't planning.
I hope you can do video, because I know that Gaia had done an orb. I talked to one of the producers there. They had done a whole segment on orb stuff, and I started showing him some of the orb stuff I got. And the one producer, I talked to him, I said, how many photographs have you got? He said, 50 to 70,000. I said, how many orb photographs? He said, oh, about 10. And they're all with him in the photograph. And the only ones that he had that weren't were with an experiencer. He's interviewing a person who's like a UFO experiencer, and suddenly these orbs are coming across the screen. So that sort of thing. So I think for you, it sounds like a real good visual thing that maybe Gaia or somebody would pick up, because it's really interesting stuff. Even if you can't, like the orbs, if you can't figure out what's going on, it's still just fascinating, almost like crop circles, where you're just looking at like, how do you do that? Even if you hoaxed it, like, how are they doing that? It's just so strange.
Right. Yeah. So I find the whole orb thing, just really fascinating. I haven't done too much with video. I have been playing around with sewing pictures together in a video format, more like stop motion.
Okay.
So I have like a stop motion thing I've done of Kai, where a hand comes out. And you know, so you can do things with your camera shutter that you can't do with the video shutter, meaning like I can take a 30-second exposure if I want in one frame, and in video, you know, you have to, I think you can only go to like a 15th. So the idea is to play with time in a different way. So I am working on those. I haven't done too many of them, but what I have done, I'm very interested in. But as far as straight video, I guess I should play around more with.
Yeah, well, even just these still photographs, it's fascinating to see this stuff. And most people don't. Are you the only one working on this that you know of? Like in terms of like a professional photographer who's actually sort of digging into this?
Well, I have noticed, like, off and on you'll have a photographer who does like a portrait series of mediums. I've seen that. You know, when I was at RIT, one of my teachers, Bill McDowell, he did a black and white project about Lilydale, which was like a very straightforward, journal, like portraits of people or portraits of the town. So I don't know of anybody working in the exact same way that I am, which is, I am a documentarian, but I'm also an experimental
That's good.
practitioner. And I've also been inspired by spiritualist practice, which spiritualism is very much, in all aspects, interested in the automatic process. And
Walter,
yeah.
had a question, I think. Walter?
Okay, yeah.
Well, we were talking about orbs, and one of my favorite authors wrote a little piece here that kind of summarizes for me my confusion about orbs. Maybe you'll recognize this, Grant. The chapter is called Orbs. The orbs you see are from other places, some light, some not. They come with information to assist as well in your shift light beings they contain. That was Destin Barnaby.
our producer here on the show today.
Our
Yeah,
producer.
we actually did an experiment last week. We went out. There was a farm where the woman said that she could take orbs. So Desta and I and a business guy went out there, and we did the old posing thing and 99 photos. And she was using a point and shoot camera, and there was like 99 photographs of orbs. And Desta had her cell camera. I had my cell camera. We couldn't pick up anything. And then Desta went home, and it's kind of a long story, but Desta was doing a bunch of experiments. When does it work? When does it not work? It wasn't working, and then said, okay, one more. Okay, I'm going to bed. That's it. And the last one, of course, is just totally, full of orbs. And that's where you're talking, Shannon, about this consciousness connection to the thing, where a lot of people do the meditation thing. They'll meditate, and or the one person can take the camera and make it appear, and then the other person takes their camera and can't make anything appear. And it seems to have that consciousness connection to the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think what I understood early in photography, and this is before, obviously I was photographing spiritualism, but why I was drawn to it is because I always thought of it as telepathic, like somehow the photographer's brain or mind or thoughts are embedded in those images because they're showing you things. You hear about the photographer's eye. Well, what is the photographer's eye? I think it's really the photographer interacting with reality, and somehow their mind plays into the specialness or uniqueness of their images, because not everybody's a good photographer, and good photographers can really warp reality and show you a different reality. And you don't even have to see that in a paranormal way. Even the most pragmatic materialist photographers will talk about it that way. As if it's a magical practice. And so I think people forget, you're using light and time, and those are two really wild things to use as raw material. So what are we really doing? Like, for example, when people say to me, and I take long exposures a lot, oh, it's just a long exposure. Well, what is a long exposure? I mean, like, you're laying time over itself, or you're creating a piece of time layered in a two-dimensional way. So I'm very interested in all of those aspects.
Okay, now you mentioned the consciousness thing, and I think it's all consciousness. I think it's all, I basically say, I think it's all linked together. It's all just, everything's consciousness. And so the UFO experiencers, 60% of them say they've got apports. And of course you had it the same thing. And so can you tell me your famous story about the teacup and the apport? Because that's a fascinating story. That seems to be a classic apport type thing, where this bizarre, it's almost like you're part of the story. They want to drag you into it.
Yes. And so there's one I didn't write about in the book, which I'll tell you the story, but the only time I've ever gotten apports was at the Arthur Findlay College in England. And the first time, it was in 2003, I went there for the first time, and I was staying in a room with a good friend of mine who's a medium named Lauren Thibodeau from Lilydale. And we had a small room, and at that time I was using film, and I had a Sharpie marker, So I'd write my film speeds or how much to push my film. And my camera bag was in my view. I was in the corner. Lauren was across the room. And I said, oh my God, my Sharpie is missing. Lauren, did you take it? And she said, no, I didn't take it. Why would I do that? And I said, no, I'm serious. It was just right there. And she says, well, ask for it back. And for me at this time, this is early on, ask for it back. That's crazy. And I go, oh, fine. Can I have it back? And I looked and it was sticking straight up out of my bag. So there was this playful ha feeling that came along with the discovery of it. And I was so shocked, I couldn't speak. It was crazy to me. And I kind of just thought, oh, I just played it off. I mean, I didn't even really think it through rationally. And she was across the room and she didn't move across the room. And I mean, so it happened so fast. So then another time I was at the Arthur Findlay College again in the future, and like a few years later, and I was staying alone, and there was a seance at night, and I came up to my room and I opened the door, and the first thing I see is my pillow propped up in an arc in the middle of my bed against the wall. So again, the first thing I see, this playful pillow just stuck in this way that I know I didn't leave it. And it was night, so the cleaners weren't in the room, and the same feeling. So the one that is in my book is again at the Arthur Findlay College another time, where we had a tea break. And so I made a cup of tea. I took a styrofoam cup. It was in a stack, right? So it was upside down. So I flipped it over myself. I put the tea bag in myself. I put the water in myself. There was nothing in it. And I know that, to go from that gravity wise, there's nothing in there. And then I take the tea into the lesson, and I'm drinking the tea during our lesson. And I don't have any American money on me. I'm sitting next to a Norwegian woman. I'm surrounded by people from all over the world. I was the only American there. And I get to the bottom of my teacup and I see an American penny in my teacup. But again, the same feeling. It was so playful and strange. And so that's the thing I associate with the airport, is the feeling of play and surprise and, oh, this is impossible. This can't be happening. But also just this playful placement so the 3 times that I would say I've had an airport-esque experience, it was always accompanied by that feeling, so these weren't in seance situations. I know people report in seances. I've met a group that just sits for airports, and they have hundreds and they document them all. I wasn't even in a seance in any of these, but I was at the same place, which was a spirituals college. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating stuff. What would you say is the most amazing thing you've seen in your entire journey down this road? Because you've probably seen a lot of weird stuff in terms of.
I have.
You saw the. Did you see a materialization from Kai that you actually?
I did, and in the book, I tell the story about how I traveled all the way to Switzerland, and Kai was doing this. Kai Mugi was doing full materialization seances, which this hadn't happened in spiritualism although the Skoll experiment reported some, there were never photographs distributed of any of their materializations. So this is something that hadn't been photographed in spiritualism for maybe 100 years, so, or more, 150 years, 1880s. So yeah, over 100 years. And so, and people, I have to say, people either love Kai or absolutely despise him. There is no middle ground with Kai. So the fact that he's doing these seances is very wonderful to some people and absolutely shocking beyond belief and just total fraud. And so I traveled to Switzerland to document one of these, and you know, we did see an apparition appear out of the curtains, and I took the picture, and I showed it to Kai, and Kai said, "Oh no, it's horrible. It was a botched materialization. This looks terrible. You can't use this picture. The spirit failed." And so then I was really disappointed because I thought I had actually captured. Then the following week he does a new seance, and then he does the proper materialization. So he allowed me to use the picture as like an example of a bad materialization. So that's one picture. But I've had all different types of experiences. Actually, the ones that affect me the most are personal, and when you tell them, they don't sound as astounding, but when they really connect with you personally, or like with on an emotional or synchronistic level, those are the ones that have affected me most in my life, but they don't sound as astounding as Kai's materialization. I don't know if you find that as well with some of the stuff, most powerful stuff you've come across.
Yeah, it's almost the thing that you have to be there. I know we had an port experience, yeah. Nesta and I, with feathers, where it was like 12 people and 15 feathers was, and when it happened to us, like I'd been documenting this story about these feathers, and then we were in Tucson, Arizona, and Desta walks out up with his feather, and I'm going, get out of here. It's like, suddenly it's like you're in the middle of this thing, and it's sort of like, and that may be what it is, which is be my final question. Then whatever Walter wants to ask, what just, and this is all speculation, after all you've done, what do you think's going on? Like, what do you think this intelligence is? What do you think's going on?
I'm really not sure. When I do my I have like a 45-minute artist talk that I give about my work.
Okay.
And what I always say is, you know, I began this project seeking answers, and instead of answers, I just came out with clusters and clusters and clusters of questions. And when I say that, that is not a cop-out. Like I really mean that. Like I just have more questions about things and the nature of being, and the history of religion, and the history of ritual, and shamanism, and it's led me down all sorts of paths of study that are all interconnected. And you know, because in our modern Western world, we're very far removed from a lot of things that were common long ago, or in other civilizations, or even in other parts of the world. You know, we separate our realities pretty clearly and make really clear distinctions between things. And so it's almost like a way of unlearning and trying to look at other ways of thinking about all of this. And so I don't really have any answers. I also think that people who approach you with they have the exact answers should probably be avoided often. Those who don't come with a spirit of questioning or like a sense of mystery, or they're going to tell you exactly what's happening. I usually stay away from that kind of approach myself. So I do think, and I was just saying this to George Hansen the other day, because you know, sometimes I'll get involved with a lot of paradrama, or, you know, this isn't easy material to work with. And a lot of times it's a lot of difficult personalities, and there's a lot of personal turmoil involved. And I'll ask myself, what am I even doing? Why do I even, like, it's a lot on you personally. And so I was talking this out with George Hansen, and I said, I guess I'm still in it because I really do think there's some answers about image itself and the spark of creativity. And there's a lot I'm learning about those things in the process of studying paranormal topics, mediums, metaphysical. I feel like the power, which is what I began with as an artist and interested in images and interested in creativity. And it's actually told me a lot and inspired me a lot. So it's very complicated stuff.
I agree with you with the idea of the question. I remember a lot of times we make the mistake of trying to sort of prove things. I remember my father was a pilot for the Canadian government, and I used to talk to him about this stuff all the time. And after 25 years, I remember I was arguing with him one time, and he said, "I don't know about this UFO stuff. It's just like, it's all questions. There's no answers to this thing." And I was thinking to myself, I can't even convince my own father this is for real. But that's the thing. And so it's almost like, and maybe you'd agree with me. I mean, you couldn't leave this alone if you tried. It's like it drags you in and drags you in, and you just get more obsessed with it all the time. And even though you're getting more questions all the time, it is really hooking. And it's almost like you look around people and say, how could you not live with this kind of stuff? It's so amazing and so spectacular. You wonder how people could sit there and watch sitcom TV every night.
I agree. It is fascinating, and it's so much. But I do try to always keep my skeptical sensibilities, because I do think it's important to not lose your horizon. You know, and that's hard. It's hard. It's tricky to balance it, because it is so so wondrous and so interesting, and so there's so many rabbit holes to go down. I mean, I just keep having ideas for projects. The more I work, the more ideas for projects I get, and but trying to keep it grounded, and also keep the skeptical point of view, and not get too lost in it, I think is really important. And finding that balance, at least for me, it is. You know. But yeah, you're right. I mean, once your eyes are open to certain things, like, you can't close them, right? Like, where do you go, like,
Yeah.
from there? But I guess part of how I approach it is I'm always trying to speak to multiple audiences at once. So I don't want to just speak to a believer audience. I also want to make it interesting enough for a skeptical audience, or an ambivalent audience, or an audience interested in history. For me, that's where I find my balance. If I can make my material interesting to 3 or 4 different viewpoints at the same time, that's when I feel like I'm working where I should be. But I know other people have totally different approaches. Like George has a completely different approach. He only wants to talk to people who are acknowledging certain things about the paranormal, and like, he wants to take it from there, you know. So, but I mean, also too, because I'm trying to deal with art, you know, and the importance of art and creativity in terms of all of this stuff. And so, I mean, I don't know if you, so Grant, you are aware of the recent developments in art history, but it's now, so it was thought at one time that the person who started abstract expressionism was a man named Vasily Kandinsky, an artist named Vasily Kandinsky. He's considered the father of abstract art. And now it is being acknowledged that there were women painters in trance, spiritualist artists, who predate him, and some by over 50 years. And so the art world, the actual legitimate art world, is now acknowledging this influence of spiritualism on the very birth of modern art. And the Guggenheim Museum in New York held a exhibition of the spiritualist painter Hilma af Klint in 2018, and it was their best-selling exhibition to date and best-selling catalog. So there is this new renewed interest, and it really was mediums and entranced mediums who set the spark for all of the art of the 20th century. So it's really, I think the art connection is really fascinating and has been lost.
Yeah. Even the idea of the spiritualism, that the suffrage movement was all the medium of the 1850s and 60s, where 25% of people were into spiritualism in the United States. So there's these connections, almost as if maybe it was intended to be, to raise consciousness, that it gets that level, that this wasn't a coincidence that these things happened.
Yeah. And it's weird how the topics get picked up again at certain times and certain points. And I definitely think we're in a liminal time. So maybe there'll be more openness to this type of study, or these types of practices.
Well, Walter, have you got a question? Or Desta, have you got a question?
I just got a comment. When Grant first started this whole orb thing that he was on, I was on Facebook, and I was going, this is really, this is going to be a lot of fun. get through this thing and let's get back to something interesting. And then he kept getting pictures and people kept throwing things at him. And then I started thinking, well, wait a minute, maybe my definition of orb, there's something wrong with my definition. That's where I picked up Desta's little piece, their channeling piece, because Grant, you've got pictures of orbs. They claim to be orbs that are shafts of light, they're flickers of light, that are have activity inside of them that seem to be whole beings themselves. I don't know how many different variations of orbs you have. And then you get to asking, well, is this a being inside of a light container? Looks just like we're beings inside of, human suits. What are these things? And you get more and more and more questions. And that's what I find fun, because when you get more and more questions, once you get past the ego part of, I've got to have the answers, the questions are a lot more important, and that's where all the fun is. And everything else, once you start getting all the answers, if you ever do, or you think you do, it falls into the mundane. And who wants to spend any time with the mundane when there's so much interesting things to go on? So, Shannon, I just want to say thanks. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this. I've learned more in this last hour or so about spiritualism and mediumship and all the adjuncts to it that I have in quite a while. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I thought it was a really fun conversation.
And hopefully Walter got me, he's sort of my agent to get me in these seances, because he sort of bugged me where I was talking about it, and then he said, maybe you'd like to talk to somebody who's actually been in a seance. And it's like, oh yeah. And so he set up last year, because of the COVID, we had David Thompson and Kai coming to the United States. So perhaps we'll meet up. They may be coming this year, and Walter's the contact, and perhaps we'll meet down there. And
I would love that. I would really love that.
Because I'll be going down wherever they are. I'll be going there.
Oh,
well,
that
brings me to a point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm starting to work on a little project, Grant, and you're part of it. And Shannon, you certainly are going to be a part of it, hopefully. And that I want to bring some attention to spirit communication, more attention even to extraterrestrial communication, which I believe is present in physical mediumship. I want the people to have a bigger venue toward physical mediumship, more information to physical mediumship. And I'm planning a celebrity seance. And I use the word celebrity in kind of a fun way, but it's the idea here is to bring in people like Grant and yourself who have history, who have readership and followership and viewership that can help really expose your work, the work of Kai, Mugi, the work of physical mediumship, the whole idea of spirit communication, and really do a really thorough job of bringing in top-notch people, not only thinkers, but people who have got audiences who may not have any particular bias to or for physical mediumship or to or for spirit communication, and putting together a group of well-known folks that we could bring in. We could do pre-interviews and post-seance interviews and really make a deal of it, maybe do a banquet together. We could sit and share ideas and really make a time of it. And so I've just started working on that. You two and Desta, by the way, you as well, Desta, are all going to be invitees, and cross your fingers, maybe we can hopefully pull this off after COVID goes, maybe spring 2021, I'm kind of shooting for.
I would love that. That sounds like a very fun time, and I would love to be there.
Beautiful. So your book is Seance, and you're working on your next project, and people can contact you, I think, on Facebook. Where else can they? Have you got a website?
Yeah. Yes, I have a website. It's my name, ShannonTaggart.com, Taggart. And there's a lot of info there, and I have a mailing list and links and everything. Beautiful.
I really appreciate it, especially being a photographer, because I keep hearing, like, why don't you get somebody who knows something about photography? And so I've finally talked to somebody. So yes. I appreciate your spending the time, and hopefully we can do it again, because I think you're into other stuff like automatic writing and stuff, and I'm into all this weird stuff and have written about it. And
yes, and I hope sometime we could talk about music downloads.
Oh yeah,
because I have this other project about musicians. So yeah, I feel
Wow.
like there's lots to talk about.
Wow. I'll have to get you on Joe Wood's show. You know, Joe Wood, she was married to Ronnie Wood from the Rolling Stones.
Oh,
She has a
wow.
podcast. I can probably get you on her podcast.
Oh, that would be awesome. I would love that.
Yeah.
She had a couple of bizarre experiences and fell down the rabbit hole, and
Wow.
she's pretty popular. She's just come out with a book on the Rolling Stones, a photography book on the Rolling Stones, all the photos she took. So I'll try to get you on with Joe Wood, and
I would love that.
we'll go and we'll talk music, because I did do the book. I mean, I don't know anything about music, but I did write a book on it. But
yeah, no, you're onto something with it. So
beautiful. Yeah, look, so let's do it again, and let's stay in touch. And thank you, Walter, and thank you for Desta. Desta has a lot of experiences, and she's sitting in the background not saying anything, but I appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. And so to be continued.
Beautiful.
To be continued. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.